In the sleepy suburb of Oakbrook, a golden retriever mix named Rusty uncovers a chilling secret: an abandoned infant in a trash bin. Will Rusty do something to save the baby? Watch till the end to find out. Subscribe to our channel and help us grow to always deliver the best stories for you. Rusty's story took place in a sleepy suburban town on the fringes of Chicago, Oakbrook, which was bathed in the hues of the setting sun. A shaggy silhouette emerged from the shadowy alleyways behind the cottages of Maple Street. That was Rusty, an aging golden retriever mix with a grizzled snout and empathetic brown eyes. His soft footfalls along the sidewalk reflected the pace of an old dog. Once the cherished pet of a family, Rusty became homeless after his owner passed away. Now he wandered the lanes of Oakbrook, a gentle drifter who had touched the hearts of many townsfolk. Despite several attempts to welcome him into an animal shelter, he always managed to elude capture, opting for the freedom of the open world over the confines of a kennel. As the evening wore on, Rusty paused his journey at the crossroads of Elm and 4th Streets. Mrs. Abernathy, a sweet-natured widow, always kept a bowl of kibble and fresh water on her porch. The veteran dog eagerly lapped up the cool water, his tail thumping the porch in thankful happiness. "There you go, old fella," Mrs. Abernathy would say from her window. "You take good care of yourself tonight, all right?" Rusty glanced up, his intelligent eyes seemingly comprehending every syllable. A soft bark was his response before he continued his nightly traipse, the irresistible aroma of meals prepared by neighborhood homes guiding his path. An unfamiliar noise piqued Rusty's attention close to the Oakbrook Community Park. His furry ears perked as he tried to discern the direction of the sound. It was a shrill, whimpering cry that struck a chord deep within his doggy senses. Worried, Rusty deviated from his usual trajectory, trailing the noise into the park. As he got closer to a series of rubbish bins adjacent to the play area, the crying intensified. Engaging his super-sensitive olfactory senses, he circled the cluster of steel bins, trying to zero in on the source of the heartbreaking sounds. At length, he parked himself next to the last bin, standing on two legs to peek inside. The sight that unfolded sent his heart pounding in his chest. Amid the disarray of tossed-away burger packets and squashed newspapers lay a wriggling mass. A human infant, not more than a few days old, was swaddled within the fraying folds of a thin blanket. Its tiny face was contorted in discomfort, emitting feeble cries. Rusty stood there for a moment, overwhelmed by the enormity of what he had just discovered. Compelled by an intuition as ancient as life itself, Rusty realized he had a critical role to play. Displaying all the delicate care of a mother cat moving her kittens, he gently caught the edge of the blanket between his teeth and lifted the baby from the garbage pile. The small child's wails subsided, comforted by Rusty's warm fur. Clasping the tiny human gently yet securely, Rusty understood that he needed to seek assistance urgently. The baby was chilling, and its cries were growing fainter. Pervaded by a sense of urgency he hadn't experienced in ages, he began to make his way out of the park, various thoughts whirling through his mind. Where should he take this little one? Who would understand the situation and provide appropriate help? As he emerged onto the street, a piece of memory sparkled in his older mind. It was the amiable presence of retired nurse Margaret, who lived in the Blue House on Sycamore Street. He often observed Margaret nursing wounded birds and homeless cats at her residence. If someone could respond properly to this situation, it would be her. Hence, brimming with renewed resolve, Rusty quickened his pace, taking extra care not to jar his frail load. As twilight descended, the roads were nearly vacant, and the few remaining people expressed surprise at the sight of the elderly dog in possession of what looked like an infant. A young person on a bicycle almost collided with a lamppost, performing a double take as Rusty sped by. Turning into Sycamore Street, the inviting gleam of Margaret's entryway captured his attention. His legs, unaccustomed to such strain, started to tire, but he persevered. The infant's survival was now his responsibility. His determination grew with every step he took. Despite being a stray, he was currently the only guard and shield for this youngling. Spotting Margaret's silhouette through the living room window, quietly unwinding with a book, he closed in on her house. Weak with exhaustion, he hauled himself up the 3 steps leading to Margaret's porch and carefully placed the baby on the welcome mat. ensuring the blanket stayed in place. Then, mustering all his remaining energy, he raised several loud, urgent barks, a sound he hadn't uttered in years. Rusty glimpsed Margaret jump, surprised, peering up from her book through the window. He barked again, hoping she'd react swiftly. The porch light flickered on, and the entrance began to swing open. The entranceway to Margaret Thorne's home echoed with an unusual sound, causing her to gasp in surprise. Rusty, a stray dog she had often watched from a distance, met her eyes, but what truly seized her attention was the small bundle placed by his front paws. Her voice barely a whisper, she found herself saying, "Oh dear." Margaret dutifully knelt, reaching for the small wrap of cloth with a nurse's trained steadiness. As she gently unfolded the blanket, a small face, pallid from the chill, was revealed. She whispered an empathetic, "Oh, you precious little one," picking up the newborn and holding it close for warmth. Rusty whimpered, wagging his tail as his anxiety reduced. Margaret gave the devoted dog an admiring look, brimming with gratitude. "Well done, Rusty," she said, her voice laden with heartfelt emotion. "You've saved this baby's life." Now on a mission, Margaret, along with Rusty and the child, moved towards the welcoming warmth of her home. Sitting in her living room, Margaret's professional experience solidly held her steady as she assessed the baby's condition. It was significantly hypothermic and unexpectedly shallow of breath. As she prepped to bring the tiny one back from the brink, Margaret found herself harking back to her days in the neonatal intensive care unit, NICU. Although it had been years since she'd last handled a newborn, her instincts kicked in with a rush. While she sought to reheat the small infant, she felt a wave of nostalgia wash over her. Margaret had been the linchpin in the NICU at Chicago Memorial Hospital for 3 decades, holding countless preemie newborns, soothing panicked parents, and rejoicing in numerous miraculous recoveries. However, her retirement had left her with a void, her ocean of medical insight and warmth left unshared and unutilized. But as she wrapped the baby in warm towels and gently massaged its tiny limbs, a flicker of purpose reignited within her heart. Margaret balanced holding the baby and reaching for her phone to call 911. As the clinical voice on the other end inquired, "Emergency services, may I know your emergency?" Margaret replied clearly and calmly, "This is Margaret Thorne at 1542 Sycamore Street. I have a newborn child, a few days old at most, suffering from hypothermia. I need an ambulance here immediately." Margaret persistently worked on reviving the baby while speaking with the dispatcher. The baby's skin color began to normalize, and its tiny whimpers gained strength. Rusty never left the baby's sight, softly whimpering from time to time as though affirming his support. Soon the sound of approaching sirens echoed in the air. 2 emergency medical technicians, Aisha, a youthful female, and her partner, the experienced Frank, darted through the entrance. "Over here!" Margaret beckoned, holding the baby in her arms. The EMT's eyes flitted between Margaret, the infant, and Rusty, trying to comprehend what was happening. "Can you explain the situation, ma'am?" inquired Aisha, already dropping to Margaret's side and reaching for her medical kit. Margaret hastily detailed Rusty's extraordinary rescue as their faces transformed from concentrated professionalism to stunned admiration. "I've been in this profession for 20 years, muttered Frank in awe, "but I've never witnessed anything close to this. That dog is a savior." While Aisha readied to move the little one, a sudden reluctance came over Margaret. "I worked as a nurse in the neonatal intensive care unit for 30 years, she blurted out. "Can I accompany you to the hospital?" The EMTs glanced at each other and then nodded. "Indeed, your experience could prove to be crucial," confirmed Frank. As they proceeded towards the ambulance, Rusty made a move to tag along. "We certainly can't leave him behind," insisted Margaret, "and Rusty saved this little one. He has to see this situation to its end." Despite it being outside of the norm, the EMTs, touched by the remarkable scenario, agreed to let Rusty into the vehicle. Throughout the swift ride to Chicago Memorial, Margaret kept the baby snug to her, with Rusty's head placed comfortably on her lap. On reaching the hospital, they were met by Dr. Liam Reeves, the current on-duty pediatrician. As he noticed the unusual entourage alighting the ambulance, his eyebrows elevated. 2 EMTs, a senior woman, a dog, and a petite patient. "Dr. Reeves," Margaret greeted, recognizing her ex-colleague, This baby needs prompt attention. Wait until you hear the journey it took to get here." As they hurried into the emergency room, Margaret quickly informed Dr. Reeves about the remarkable rescue. The doctor's expression went ashen as he evaluated the infant. "Good heavens," he whispered, "if Rusty hadn't discovered the baby when he did." He left the dreadful thought hanging in the air. As the medical staff busied with stabilizing the tiny patient, Margaret easily slipped back into her nursing role, offering useful insights and help. Dr. Reeves, initially dubious about introducing a retired nurse and dog into his ER, quickly realized the worth of Margaret's knowledge and the calming influence of Rusty. Time flew amidst the flurry of activity. As day broke, Dr. Reeves approached Margaret, who was now seated in a chair with Rusty resting at her feet. "Margaret," he voiced, heavy with worry, "we've managed to stabilize the infant. But there's an additional concern. We've detected an unusual innate ailment that necessitates specific care." Margaret felt her heart plummet, considering everything the infant had already endured. "Now another problem?" Her gaze dropped to Rusty, who peered back at her with knowing eyes. In that moment, she made a choice. "I'm not leaving," she affirmed. "This little trooper will need all the aid it can secure. And though my days of active service may be over, I still have valuable resources to offer." A small, appreciative smile played at the corner of Dr. Reeves's mouth. "I was hoping you'd consider staying on. Your expertise could be invaluable, particularly with a situation like this." As the sun heralded the arrival of a new day in Chicago, its warm glow filtering through the hospital windows, a renewed resolve washed over Margaret. She glanced at Rusty, ever so loyal, still at her side, and then at the minuscule infant battling for survival in the NICU. This story was far from a conclusion, she thought. The genuine test was only just commencing. However, buoyed by Rusty's awe-inspiring brave act and her own reignited commitment to nursing, Margaret felt prepared for whatever lay ahead. Unbeknownst to her, the most significant revelations were yet to unfold. As the morning progressed, the hushed corridors of the pediatric ward buzzed with commotion. The incredible rescue of the deserted infant by an errant pooch had rapidly become the talk of the hospital, captivating the hearts of both healthcare personnel and patients. The trio of Margaret, Rusty, and the determined little fighter known endearingly as Baby Hope were at the center of this whirlwind. Detective May Chen from the Chicago PD made her way down the hallway, her keen eyes scrutinizing everything. She'd been allocated to the case charged with gradually unwinding the perplexing events surrounding Baby Hope's desertion. As she neared the NICU, she noticed Margaret dozing off on a chair outside, with Rusty dutifully at her feet. "Mrs. Thorne," Detective Chen murmured, bringing Margaret back from her brief nap. Margaret's eyes fluttered open, swiftly acclimating to the surroundings. "Oh, Detective, is there any update?" Chen gestured negatively. "Not as of yet, unfortunately, but I wanted to keep you informed about our progress, and I need to ask you certain additional queries." As their conversation proceeded, Chen found herself touched by Margaret's unwavering commitment and Rusty's loyal companionship. It was evident that this unusual duo had established a deep connection with Baby Hope. "We've issued alerts and are going through video records from the park," Chen explained. "I must tell you up front that scenarios like these are often complex and difficult to untangle." Margaret nodded in understanding, her hand gently ruffling Rusty's fur. "I'm aware, but we can't throw in the towel. This little one has the right to know their origins." Suddenly, their discussion was interrupted by a disturbance from the hallway. An austere man in a suit was heatedly disputing with a nurse, his loud voice echoing where Margaret and Rusty sat. "I'm not interested in your rules. That dog is a stray and could potentially pose a health risk. It must be removed and sent to a shelter right away." Margaret rose, her face reddening with indignation. "Pardon me, Inspector," she announced, striding towards the contentious scene with Rusty following closely. Approaching, Margaret identified the man as Gerald Hawkins, the zealous chief of the local animal control division. She'd had previous clashes with him while representing the local homeless animals. "Mr. Hawkins," Margaret interrupted, her tone resolute, "Rusty is not merely a random stray. He's a brave rescuer who saved an infant's life. He's more than earned his right to stay." Hawkins spun around, his eyes squinting. "Mrs. Thorne, I should have guessed you'd have a hand in this." Regardless of his hero status, rules are rules. That dog must come with me. Attracted by the uproar, Dr. Reeves joined the gathering. What appears to be the issue here? After a brief explanation, Dr. Reeves looked contemplative. Mr. Hawkins, while I acknowledge your worries, Rusty's presence has had massive positive effects on baby Hope. He paused, an idea forming. How about we officially recognize Rusty as a therapy dog in training? Margaret's face brightened at the proposition, but Hawkins maintained his skepticism. That's not the procedure. There are formalities and certifications. We're ready to expedite, countered Dr. Reeves. Given the unique circumstances, I'm positive we can figure something out. For now, I'll personally vouch for Rusty's presence here. Hawkins spluttered, visibly annoyed but helpless against the doctor's decree. All right, he grudgingly agreed, but I'll be keeping a close eye on this situation. He shot Rusty a spiteful look before storming away. As the atmosphere relaxed, Margaret expressed her gratitude to Dr. Reeves. Thank you, Liam. I'm not sure how we would cope if Rusty had to depart. Reeves returned the smile, but his gaze held seriousness. It was the bare minimum I could do. But Margaret, we have to discuss baby Hope's state. It's more complex than our initial assessments. Dr. Reeves displayed the latest diagnostic reports for baby Hope in the NICU. The baby is suffering from a major birth heart defect named tetralogy of Fallot with pulmonary atresia, which necessitates a highly specialized surgical procedure. Margaret inhaled sharply. Her vast experience in the field had taught her the gravity of the situation. How is this possible, Liam? She asked. Dr. Reeves ran his fingers through his hair, a clear indication of his anxiety. This is a risky operation, particularly since the patient is such a tiny newborn. But it's the only choice we have. As they delved deeper into the specifics of the operation, a worried look washed over Dr. Reeves's face. What are you holding back, Liam? He heaved a sigh. The thing is, I've only conducted this surgical procedure once during my internship. The baby didn't survive. Since then, I've shied away from pediatric cardiology. Margaret extended her hand to him, gripping his arm reassuringly. Liam, that was a long time ago. You're one of the finest physicians I've ever encountered. If anyone can pull this off, it would be you. Their conversation was interrupted by a nurse who dashed into the room. Dr. Reeves, Mrs. Thorne, and baby Hope's parents are in the waiting room, claiming they are her parents. Margaret and Dr. Reeves shared a shocked glance before quickly leaving for the waiting room, with Rusty following them closely. They found Detective Chen in conversation with a young pair who appeared both anxious and excited. Mr. and Mrs. Ellison, said Detective Chen as she introduced Margaret and Dr. Reeves. They have been taking care of your baby. The woman, tears welling in her eyes, stepped forward. Is our little girl all right? Margaret was flooded with varied emotions. She felt relieved that Hope's parents may have been found, yet she also felt uneasy. Something about the couple's demeanor didn't quite feel right. As Detective Chen started grilling the couple with questions surrounding the baby's abandonment, Margaret observed their responses closely, which seemed rehearsed and devoid of any genuine sentiment she expected from desperate parents who had left their child behind. Rusty, who had been silently witnessing the scene, suddenly growled softly, his gaze fixed on the couple. The man was taken aback and stepped backward. Keep that beast away from us. Detective Chen, sensing the tension, asked Mr. Ellison if there was a problem. As she carried on with her questions, the couple's account of the story seemed full of inconsistencies. In the end, under Detective Chen's scrutiny, Margaret's questioning eyes and Rusty's firm gaze, the couple's pretense began to falter. Enough, the woman exasperatedly voiced. Truth be told, we aren't her parents. We came to know about the reward for providing information. We anticipated that if we assumed her custody, we could... Chen interrupted her, an icy tone to her voice. You two are under investigation for alleged fraud and meddling in police work. As the counterfeit parents were escorted away, Margaret experienced a blend of disillusionment and relief. She peered at Rusty, who once again appeared at ease, and rubbed the area behind his ears. Good fellow, she whispered. You recognized, didn't you? Dr. Reeves, viewing the episode unfold, expressed his shock with a disbelieving shake of his head. It's hard to imagine that anyone would exploit such a situation. Margaret responded in a mellow tone. People can astonish you, either positively or negatively. As they prepared to return to the NICU, Dr. Reeves's pager beeped. He turned pale as he perused the message. Baby Hope's health is worsening. We need to conduct the operation immediately. Margaret's heartbeat quickened as they hastened back to the NICU. She found herself muttering a silent wish while Baby Hope was wheeled in for emergency surgery. Stay strong, precious one, she whispered. We're all in this together and are by your side. Alongside Rusty, Margaret looked on as Baby Hope was taken into the operating theater, with Dr. Reeves at the helm. As the doors closed, she was left with the lingering thought that the toughest phase of this extraordinary journey was impending. Margaret sat outside the operating room with anxiety, her hand soothingly resting on Rusty's head. Rusty stayed focused on the operating room door, unwavering. In and out of the room, physicians and nurses quickened their pace, their faces stern with focus. Each time the door would open, Margaret's heart would skip a beat in anticipation of an update. It wasn't until nightfall painted the sky deep indigo that Dr. Reeves finally stepped outside, his surgeon's cap in his hand, his face wearied. Margaret got up, her legs weak from prolonged sitting. Dr. Reeves, she queried in a hushed voice. Looking up, Dr. Reeves let a smile spread across his weary face. She made it through, Margaret. Her situation was critical for a while, but she survived. That one's a real trooper. Margaret felt an overwhelming sense of relief that made her need to take a seat again. Rusty, sensing the change in mood, let out a quiet, happy bark. However, there's another matter, Dr. Reeves added, his voice shifting to a serious tone. Detective Chen has arrived, and they've located the mother. As if on cue, Detective Chen appeared from around the corner, followed by a young girl who couldn't have been more than 16. The young girl's eyes, bordered by red from weeping, indicated her nervousness as she twisted her hands anxiously. Mrs. Thorne, Dr. Reeves, Chen began softly. This here is Zoe Matthews. She's the mother of Baby Hope. Zoe raised her gaze, her eyes reflecting a blend of trepidation and desperate optimism. Is my child all right? I am very sorry. I didn't know what to do. I was filled with fear. Margaret's heart poured out empathy for the young girl. Rising from her seat, she gently held Zoe's hands in her own. Your baby is going to make it just fine, sweetheart. She's very resilient, just like her mom. Margaret guided a tearful Zoe to a chair, choosing to sit next to her. Over the following hour, Zoe narrated her story. She was an honor roll student dreaming of becoming a medical professional, yet due to a mishap at a social gathering, she found herself pregnant. Frightened of letting down my strict parents and compromising my college admission, I kept the pregnancy a secret, Zoe said, her voice trembling. I lost it. I bundled her up and rushed her to the park. I thought someone would locate her rapidly. I never intended for her to be in danger. The instant I arrived home, I realized how I'd blundered. I've been struggling to muster the bravery to step forward ever since. Detective Chen, who had been quietly attentive, finally broke his silence. Zoe revealed herself to us this afternoon. Given the conditions and her willingness to cooperate, we're liaising with the DA to ensure she's justly handled. Dr. Reeves, who had thus far remained quiet, cleared his throat. Zoe, your daughter has a condition called tetralogy of Fallot with pulmonary atresia. It's a serious heart defect, but we've managed to perform corrective surgery. She will require ongoing care, but with adequate treatment, she can lead a normal life. Zoe's eyes widened with shock and regret. Oh, I wouldn't have forsaken her if I had been aware. May I see her, please? Dr. Reeves nodded, his look softening. She's recuperating right now. I think it would be beneficial for both of you to spend some time together. As they prepared to visit the baby, Margaret felt a tug on her sleeves. It was Detective Chen. There's an extra piece to this tale, the investigator imparted, a trace of a smirk crossing her lips. We discovered security footage from the public playground. You'll probably want to observe this. Chen displayed a tablet and activated a recorded incident. It pictured Rusty encountering the infant. Yet what ensued afterward left Margaret astounded. The age-ridden canine attempted to signal numerous individuals passing by, but sadly, none heeded the abandoned creature. Eventually, Rusty delicately secured the baby in his teeth and embarked on a mission to solicit assistance. He appeared to understand precisely the course of his actions, Chen articulated, an indelible admiration lining her speech. It's as if he perceptively acknowledged that the infant required more help than an indifferent commuter could give. Margaret stooped to her knees, enfolding Rusty in a warm embrace. "You magnificent, astute dog," she vocalized softly, moisture welling in her eyes. "You are more than an extraordinary animal. You are a protective spirit." Over the ensuing days, a whirlwind of bustling events enveloped the newborn Hope, now formally christened as Lily Hope Matthews. Zoe's parents, originally flabbergasted and infuriated, united in embracing their child and grandchild with compassion and backing. Welfare services collaborated intimately with the family to guarantee Zoe and Lily received the necessary assistance. Margaret, unable to withstand the thoughts of abandoning Lily's circumstance, reluctantly returned to part-time work in the NICU, with Rusty as her steadfast companion, now engaged as the Institute's recent comfort dog under tutelage. Dr. Reeves, inspired by Lily's crucial surgery and Margaret's unrelenting resolve, fixed his mind to pursue pediatric cardiology and aspired to assist more juveniles like Lily. Regarding Rusty, his courageous exploit had seized the emotions of the entire municipality. Beneficent gifts trickled in for his well-being, and Margaret formally took him into her household, providing the senior dog with the nurturing habitat he earned. On one radiant afternoon, a month from that inauspicious night, Margaret took her seat on a park bench in Oakbrook Community Park, while Rusty rested comfortably at her feet. She held precious Lily in her arms, who was now flourishing and bubbling with joy. Zoe squatted by them, her countenance radiating as she brushed her daughter's minuscule feet. "I didn't envision that I'd ever return to this place," Zoe echoed softly, casting her gaze around the playground. "Yet now it feels as though it's the onset of an amazing new chapter, instead of a conclusion." Margaret returned a warm smile as they looked on, while a butterfly landed briefly on Rusty's snout, triggering a swift sneeze from the elderly canine. "Existence has a peculiar tendency to gift us redemption," Margaret contemplated. "At times, we simply necessitate someone to guide us." It was as if Rusty comprehended her utterance. He lifted his head, his brown eyes teeming with wisdom, meeting Margaret's gaze. In that instant, amidst the fresh start they had all received, Margaret experienced a deep sense of thankfulness and purpose. The public garden where everything commenced had turned into a symbol of optimism and fresh starts, signifying that even in our bleakest moments, an act of kindness, even from a furry friend, can alter everything. As Lily hummed and stretched out her hand to stroke Rusty's coat, Margaret realized that their remarkable adventure hadn't concluded. It was only just beginning. If this narrative touched your heart, hit the like button, subscribe, and watch our subsequent Fuzzy Chronicle available on screen right now.